This lecture is about psychodynamics. I don't really wish to concern myself too much with psychodynamics. It's kind of an eclectic field. Not really eclectic, but just, it doesn't really have, right now for me, it doesn't really have a strong theoretical approach that I like, but it is in fact a field of discipline. Basically what it means is interactions or multiple interactions or whatever between two people or multiples of people. Dynamics is called that because there is a force involved, as opposed to psychokinetics, in which is just motion, or psychomechanistics, where you use models. Psychodynamics is essentially a Platonic model used at a interactive level. A Platonic second-order model used at an interactive level. There's only forces involved. There's velocity and acceleration, maybe, but it's mainly just a force. And usually it's brief, usually constant, and there's variation to it. But let's just consider the first one first. It's easier. It leads to complications. You try to get too elaborate, like using dragon curves or arabesque curves or Finney curves or TNB curves or parametric curves and helices and stuff. Those curves are too complex. Let's begin with something simple. Psychodynamics, you define it basically as a, let me take some examples first. I think this is a better way. Let's say you have someone that's been abused a lot, and so the psychodynamics is you say to them, or at least let on to them. It's kind of complex. You can let on things, and they'll kind of respond anyway. And I won't say they deliberately respond. Like if and like for instance, if there's a poor person, and you say, "Oh, I'm going to give you $5," you can think that, and they'll kind of look up or look a little bit more attentive. So it's basically coupled that way. It's subliminal. I would reckon it's not really magic. It's the way it works is there are vibrations in your body through your lungs. Each one has a symbolic definition according to life forms. The other life form can interpret your breathing and the waves generated and characterize it as an emotional and even categorical response or interaction or stimulus, whatever. It's a little bit more abstract than that. See what I'm saying? There are ways of lying. Like you can take a poor person and you can think that you're going to steal $5 from him, act like you're going to give him $5. He'll still like it. So you can't conceal your thoughts. Let's assume that all these interactions, both parties are being honest. There are people out there whose psychodynamics is not particularly effective in certain categories. There are ways around that, but some people do not like being interpreted and made fun of or interacted with certain ways. They're very stuffy. The way around that basically is, let's say you meet someone that doesn't like to be treated condescendingly. So the way around that is most people guard themselves. They do not guard other people, meaning you can use third-party references or refer to yourself. Like, say you meet someone stuffy, who's old and doesn't want to be manipulated for being old or doesn't want to seem senile. So you just talk about yourself like, oh, I'm going to go get high tonight, or oh, I'm going to get hungover, or do I look hungover, or do I look too fat, or something. Like subliminally letting on something like that and not lying about it. Subliminally, you will get a emotionally rich response. Now, the response is subtle. It's something you can learn to recognize in people, like giving off subliminal signals. It's not really unconscious. You're aware of what you're letting off. You're also aware of their response. It's not entirely that pronounced. You have to be real subtle about being very attentive to interpreting their response. A lot of times, the reason why a lot of psychiatrists and psychologists don't really know about it is because they're not really sensitive to the category of response. Like, let's say someone looks kind of enthusiastic or excited or frustrated or down or sad or angry. A lot of times those emotions subliminally, they let it on so very little, just move a little. You can't really identify it, so you just assume nothing's happening at all. And that's not really the case, but virtually everyone on Earth interacts categorically according to psychodynamics and interactions. And it gets worse when you're with con artists and people that don't like to reveal what's about them. The effective way to deal with that is talk about yourself or a third person. You may say you meet a black man that doesn't want to be criticized for his ethnicity. You talk about yourself being Mexican, you get a categorical response. And the third person reference is funny. Like you can say stuff like, "Oh, he smells worse than you," or if you're with a gay guy, you can say, "I like him better than you," or a woman, you can say, "I like her breasts better than yours," or I'd rather go out with her or something. It doesn't have to be derogatory. A lot of people think that, upon hearing this lecture, might think that psychodynamics is just derogatory, making fun of people, and generate a lot of rich responses. Like, there are a lot of black people and a lot of poor people, a lot of old people. Old people are a different category mostly, but black people and poor people, a lot of those people who are in bad situations, or gay people even, you say something like, "Oh, I'm sorry," you let on that you're sorry or you care or you didn't mean for it to happen. Those have different categorical definitions. For instance, like, sorry can be construed as condescending. I care could be construed as amorous, like erogenous. I'm sorry it happened might be construed as apologetic or fault assuming, guilt assuming, or I did it could be assumed as guilt imbuing, but you get a negative response. But the response is usually different. I guess what suffices for an interaction like that, say you meet a black man, just saying I'm sorry. They'll look kind of sad or tense, just kind of down and weak and like really weary and tired. I, for one, am not a racist. I don't believe in exploiting people of any particular category. I use it to measure categorical response. It brings richness into my life and my jobs to interact categorically. And I'm not a con artist. I usually let on what I'm thinking. I breathe it out, and they respond just minimally. If I were to say to an old woman, "Oh, I'm sorry you're old," or something, she'd probably get pretty mad and report me to my boss or something. You let it on subliminally, so just kind of look irritated with you. Maybe irate, but mostly just irritated. They don't really do much of anything. You learn to read the signals. The more you study it, you realize you can even talk to the TV, and that's a little subtle because you figure they're not even in the room. How could they respond? And in quantum field theory, they say that every eigenfunction of one particle interacts with every eigenfunction of the other particle, meaning that in a two-particle interaction, psychodynamics, for example, you have an infinite field and an infinite field. It's an entire matrix or dictionary of responses. So even though the person is not in the room, can't actually feel your response, you'll get a response anyway. That's why no one can model affect using computers. You can't map an entire dictionary across. You're taking an enormous amount of memory in 3 dimensions. It's just too rich. That's also why children appear so immature. They don't have a dictionary of experiences built up. Just a blank slate. Like no response at all, or just timidity or confusion or attentiveness, waiting for more information. You can't really read children the way you can older people. But what I mean in psychodynamics, like, when I first started, I wanted to really kind of defend myself against psychological attacks. That's a bit paranoid, maybe not entirely paranoid, but I was led to the wrong track. I don't really think that's an effective. You might start off that way, but you'll pretty much soon learn that things like irony, sarcasm, patronage, condescension are a lot more effective than things like aggression, anger, fear induction, intimidation, repugnance induction, and insults. And they're more effective too. And this is more entertaining, more interesting, at least more insight, more compassion, more meaningful situations. And I believe this is the proper forum for psychodynamics. Although I used to tend, when I first started out in the second time around, and this week, I was starting to use sarcasm and condescension. I basically realized that being around certain classes of people, like, a lot of times just saying you're sorry around old people are different, but around black men or prostitutes or poor people or homeless people, they just look kind of sad. And I'd rather care about people than be seen as a very condescending, snooty jerk. And the more you learn about it, the more you understand. That's why it's important to understand psychodynamics and not just say, oh, this is for manipulators, controllers, people that want to get money, people that want to get power, people that want respect, want sex, want whatever they want. Power. That's not really what psychodynamics is about. I don't think it's healthy to study it that way. You could, but you'll pretty much learn that it's better just to care for people and bless them whenever you can. Structurally help them, structurally interact with them, to derive something meaningful. We're all going to be on this earth for a very short while, and it'll be over before we know it. So you might as well try to be productive and compassionate. Indeed, I believe that it's one of the purposes of life. There are only 6 of them. To care about animals, to live a good life, to have friends, to have sex, and to reproduce. And there's 5 of them. I forget what the 6th one is, but that's what I gleaned from my theory of unified physics. Grand unified physics is That's really the only direction we have in life. It's based on my interpretation of the way the rules of evolution is designed, the way the universe is designed as integrated with biology, confluent with biology, and even consistent with biology, meaning that it is defined by, defines, and is logically equivalent to in a semantic sense. You have to study my other lectures to learn more about my physics theory. Now, apparently there is no God, but you can believe it if you like. But but I'm just saying, psychodynamically, you can say a lot of things that have categorical interpretation. Like, for instance, you get around a homeless person, you can say, or a drug user, you can say, my drug is better, and they'll respond a certain way. And I used to use levers like irony, patronage, sarcasm, and condescension more often than not. But there's just ways of getting a stronger response. Often it's a little more punctuated. It's easier to measure the nature of their response with those methods. Like, for instance, with condescension, they'll usually kind of look around, kind of glassy-eyed, like loose-eyed. With patronage, they'll kind of look embarrassed or uneasy. With sarcasm, they'll kind of look like a little bit put off, but not really. Those aren't really hard insults, or like just calling old people old bags or something, for example. It's not really a direct insult or an ethnic disparagement. Even subliminally, you won't get much of a response that way. There are certain people you meet that really don't like people letting on certain things about them, but those are mainly like drug users and gangsters and those type of ideologies, serial killers. Most people are habilitated well enough where they're not extreme about subliminal messages. And at this point, it's not really entirely subliminal for me. I believe it's not even subconscious. It's more like something I'm aware of and respond to. The important thing is to realize you also have to categorize intellectually their response and your stimulus to really make it make sense. What you say and how they respond, or let on and how they respond categorically. If they're talking if you just let something on while they're talking to someone else, you'll see the nature of their language change. I don't want to get into too much into the nature of what subliminal language is. It does exist. I'll get into that in a different lecture. For now, we're just going to say that psychodynamics, you can model it using a 3-vector, a 6-vector, and 9-vector. Actually, it's 16-dimensional. I use it in modeling after Catholic sixes. It's basically a Platonic trio. 0, first and second order logic, or first, second, and third, taken across a dialectic duplicate. 3 times 2 is 6. Taken more elaborately, it's actually 16. It's a little bit hard to think that way. Why would it be 16? Forget offhand why it's actually 16, but it actually is. That's a little bit complicated because it's general relativistic. But anyways, it's basically what you have to do is you have to take a multiplet for take something duplicately, then take a multiplet for the richness of the Catholic dialectic, a multiplet. 2 times 2 times 2, taking duplicate times 2 again is 16. That's the most consistent theory I've come up with so far. It's indeed true, but reasoning that way is, like my theory of proofs that schizophrenia is age disorders, is pretty hard, and you have to have a lot of combinatorics and general relativity to really understand how to use the math functions effectively. And indeed, there are things in psychodynamics which are subtle and make it hard for some people to read other people. For instance, if you breathe a lot of tension while you're in the beginning, or the middle, or the end of your response, your stimulus to the other person, you'll get different responses. Like, let's say you breathe in very heavy when you're interacting, giving your stimulus off. A lot of people get intimidated or something. Their response will be less marked, or their response will involve other things. So you have to be really even-minded. It really won't work to send off multiple signals. Like, you can get mad if you tell them you don't like old people or something, because you'll get a different response than if you say you don't like old people to someone. But you can be funny at times, like telling slightly overweight women that you think they're thin, or Mexicans that you think that their kids act like they're black, or talking about sex, drugs, and shooting up to middle-aged women, or talking about weight around fat people, or talking about telling tall and fat women you like their height. And it's kind of funny that way. You get a very marked response. It's one of the more pronounced responses. That's how I first got started in it. With language like that, like thoughts like that, with breath, without too much tension, you get a very strong response. It's very easy to measure. In fact, it's so easy, it's almost like purely conscious, their response and yours, your interaction, your stimulus. And this is probably the way for the beginner to begin, because if you start with something general like, oh, I like your job, or I like your shoes, or you got nice tits or something, you're not going to get a very strong response, particularly with things that really matter. You'd be surprised. The best leverage for learning about psychodynamics is with things people feel guilty or uneasy about or trying to cover up or are sensitive to. Maybe not very sensitive to because they just get angry, but just kind of sensitive to, like women that are slightly overweight or black women that don't like being black or old people that are in pain all the time. I'm not trying to say it's funny to make fun of these people, but if you use a little bit of third-party deference or a light patronage, it's pretty funny, like telling a gay man you like women, or just things like that, or telling a gay man I'm sorry or something. There's different categories. You get a stronger response. You begin to realize the responses are real, so is the stimulus. There must be some relationship. You can model that way, and then at a later point you can involve things like slurs and arabesque curves and dragon curves. To give you a brief introduction, the dragon curve is an inverted, it's basically a cubic that passes through the centroid. A dragon curve looks very similar. It's basically two circles conjoined, looks like a letter S kind of. It's a way of a curve for modifying your response to get different results, and each one is different. An arabesque curve looks kind of like a, I don't know, so what do you call it? There's not really a math function for it. Maybe like a inverse trigonometric. Yeah, this trigonometric. Yeah, an inverse trigonometric function. The tangent, I believe, looks kind of like long like that. With those methods, you can get, with slurs, you can start out trying to be nice and then get mean, or at least in condescending or patronizing or sarcastic, and you get a much different response. I haven't really done really much experience in that kind of thing, but it'll look kind of strange because it'll stimulate them in a much different way using an arabesque curve or a dragon curve or a Finney curve. A Finney curve is basically something which is highly discontinuous at the beginning, kind of like acting excited about meeting old people. That's not really that complex to intimate. You just kind of act confused at first. It's a whole category for interaction, like using category and category to pair them up, get a quantum field theory interaction matrix. It's a Hilbert matrix, infinite terms in both ways. The square term is root n plus n minus 1. Root n minus 1, the product. It's I believe what it is, what is that? It's the I think it's the eigenconstant or something. It's basically the calculation of the magnitude of the vector, or the Hilbert matrix normalized. You take the matrix times its transpose, you get the normalized function. Most of the terms cancel out. That's all I'm going to say for this lecture. I really would hope people wouldn't get the idea I'm a mean person. When I started out, I was really so shaken by... Come on, Christina. Christina, I'm making a lecture.
You mouth off
Christina, please stop it.
You mouth off at me all the time and irritate the fuck out of me.
I would really like for people not to get the idea that I'm aggressive or profoundly strange, but when I first started out, it was really sort of... I was under so much pressure that I was a bit over-aggressive about it. Now that I'm more even-minded, I really am a lot more scientific and compassionate, and that's really the way to be in psychodynamics. But I do recommend sarcasm, patronage, condescension, and a few other methods. There are 6 of them. I forget what the other ones are, but those are the most effective ones for getting a more sharpened response that, at least measurable, gets you believing in it.